Hello. In this video, I want to give you a description of how, now that you have completed a sensitivity analysis, how you would use that for your financial modeling to move on to a scenario analysis. Now, as you can see, since the last time that we did our work, I've gone ahead and completed all of the sensitivity analysis for my model. And I have actually created a sort column over here where I just use the absolute value of the up down equity change. You'll see why in a minute. But I'm using the absolute values basically for everything so that um, when I, uh, sorry, I'm losing my brain here for a second, but I'm using the absolute values so that whenever I do the sort, I wind up with the narrowest or least changes at the top, whether they're positive or negative, and the greatest changes at the bottom. And by sorting this way, whenever I go to do my chart, I wind up having something that looks like this. It sort of charts the it's kind of weird. I don't know why Excel does it, but it charts the stuff that's at the top here. It puts that at the bottom of this list and puts the other stuff at the top. And so kind of the consequence, and so bottom's top, top's bottom. Consequence of that is you get this chart that's very white at the top and gets narrower going down, and that's why we call it a tornado chart. And key thing that you'll want to do, I have a lot of information in here. I'll kind of show you this real quick. Is you want to make sure that you spread that chart out a lot, because if you don't, let's just see what happens if I kind of jam it all up. I can't even actually see all of the rows of data. And so it becomes very confusing what I'm looking at. But as long as you spread that all the way out, you're in a good position to be able to see what's going on. Now, the way you would read this chart basically is a big move, positive or negative. You can see how big it is out here. So, for example, cost of equity, when the value is shifted down, so cost of equity is lowered by 10% of whatever it was. Um, that increases the value of equity. So the shift is down, but the value is positive. So increased it by about $200,000. Whereas if you shift the cost of equity up, the blue says you're shifting up. So shifting the cost of equity up reduces the value of your equity by about $150,000. So it's not perfectly symmetrical, not something that you would necessarily be surprised with. Now, the second thing is shifting days open per month, right? And so now we're looking at the upside of that. So shifting days open per month up, right? Um, or sorry, down. So it's a red bar, right? So shifting it down lowers the value of equity. Shifting it up raises the value of equity. Um, so it's a little bit confusing, you can see, to read, but what you want to do is use the color to say, oh, okay, so I'm shifting down, and then the direction that it is, it's to the left, so you lose money. So shifting down on average dollars per customer causes me to lose money. Shifting up, because it's blue, causes me to gain money or value of equity, and so on. So that's the interpretation of it. The reason we use the chart and the value of the chart is to help you understand which variables have the biggest impact on the value of your project. Now you got the same thing going over here with NPV. In this case, I went ahead and used the same sort order for both, and so things won't be exactly the same in the tornado. You could always just line them up as two completely separate sets of data, plot them, and do a true tornado on each one of them. I just didn't. Um, and of course, because on the cost of equity you use or on equity you use the equity discount rate, it's a big thing up here, and the cost of capital isn't, because we don't adjust it. Um, and when you're doing NPV, you use cost of capital, so it's a big thing, and vice versa. So there are some benefits to sort of reordering it. It's just a little bit harder to read across and see did it have a similar impact on equity and NPV? But bottom line is you got those charts. So what do you do with those next from a scenario standpoint? What you want to do is start going down the list of your assumptions. First of all, think about which of those are management assumptions, meaning it's a decision, kind of a decision that we make up front and we're just going to stick to, versus which of them have some risk to them, and we're going to be sort of stuck with those, if you will. And so, kind of starting from the top with cost of equity, it's not 100% under our control, but quite frankly, it's one of those things that it doesn't really represent a risk to the project because we'll know the cost of equity once we have the money. It's not going to change after that, and therefore it's not an uncertainty that I'm trying to explain to an investor and basically say, you as an investor exposed to the risk of the cost of equity. Not true. Days open per month, that's a decision variable. And so 100% a management variable. We just decide the hours and the days. And so even though it has a big impact and we want to think about that in terms of how we set the model up and negotiate and so forth, not something that we would want to run a scenario on. And again, don't forget to keep looking across and seeing, what matters over here as well. Average dollars per customer. That's a big one, clearly, and we can't control that. When a customer walks in the door, they will spend what they will spend. And so that's one that we'll want to pay attention to. Food cost, and we'll look at direct labor costs too. They're sort of related. Those are a little bit on the gray side. On the one hand, we want to try to manage to that. On the other hand, we won't really know for sure what it's going to be until we get in there. And so as a result of that, I'm going to go ahead and include those as things that we would want to consider. Then we have the number of students on campus per day and the percent of student customers per day. Those are really a related factor, obviously. If we move one or move the other, we get sort of the same result. You can see that it moves everything. So we'll just pick one of those two. I'm going to work on the percent student customers per day for now because that's really our unknown, right? The number of students on campus in a day, that's going to move a little bit, but not a lot. But the one that really is going to throw us off at this point is we're just at this. We hope that we get 20% of customers, our students as customers per day, but we could get more, we could get less. And so, that starts to build for us a short list of values that really matter. Now we'll look over here at NPV. Cost of capital is a big one over here that we haven't talked about, but it's just like cost of equity. It's something we'll negotiate and lock in up front. So it's not really a risk to the investor per se. And quite frankly, once you drop below that student customers per day, everything else starts to have not quite as big an impact. I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter, but in the grand scheme of things, you're talking about $1.3 million worth of equity, and you're saying that these other things have less than a $46,000 impact on that. And so those by themselves, being surprised on them, wouldn't really be enough to cause you to be like, oh my gosh. Now, for completeness, keep in mind that this is just a sensitivity analysis. So if there are any of those that you look at and you think, well, that's actually a pretty, things could change pretty dramatically on that, a lot more than they could change on this stuff up top that's very, very uncertain, then we would want to consider going ahead and doing that. So, let's just look down quick. Do we think that we would be off by more than, call it 3% on the average tax rate? Hard to imagine. Are we going to be off by more than 10% of what we estimated on our period costs? Hard to imagine. The faculty and staff, again, we could be off a little bit on that. We've already built that in. But quite frankly, I think they're the more likely stable customer that we have. PPE, we've basically this is what happens if plant, property, and equipment changes by 10% of its value. I think that even if we were off by 20% either way, it wouldn't matter. Loan term, 10 years, that's what it's going to be. Inflation rate, same thing. Interest expense, it's as a percentage, we may be off a little bit. We may be off from 8% to 9% or something like that. Not enough to really matter. Depreciation, we'll know that in advance. The portion of debt and current debt, all of those again are decision variables. We will decide how much of that we're going to do, and so we want to understand what's going to happen with that. Inventories doesn't matter at all. I can't imagine that the 2 weeks were off by much. Percent of faculty, staff, customers per day. I think that's the M3 one. Just doesn't matter. Student customers per day at the beginning doesn't really have that big of an impact. It just doesn't matter. We have no accounts receivable, and our cash equivalents, they're cash. They don't really affect these valuations. So we've gone through all of that, and we've satisfied ourselves that probably we have the good list. So I just went over here and created a little scenario table for this to help me remember why. And so you can put it on a different sheet if you want to, but this is the easiest way to do it in my view, is just sort of stick it in here. And so now what you want to do is you want to think in terms of, for those variables, what's your likely case, your best case, and your worst case. And so I felt like the original assumptions I had are my likely case. Best case for food and direct labor would be that we wind up being able to manage that better, get it down to maybe 20%. Could go up to 30%. Just hard to imagine it could go beyond 30%. The two that we really don't manage are the amount the customer spends and the percent of students. Could be that students on average spend up to $15 a day. Let me just throw that out there. The idea there might be that, look, they come in, they share an appetizer, they have their meal, maybe they have a drink or two, and so next thing they're spending an average $15 a day. I know that sounds like a high number, but not that far out of line when you consider it's a sit-down place, not a fast food place, and quite frankly, they're spending close to that, $10 amount on fast food with no drink or anything included. Now they could potentially spend less, but I don't think it goes down to $5. I think it probably goes down to about $8, simply because I don't think that they can. You can get much for less than $8 once you consider food, drink, all that sort of stuff, and the number of student customers per day. It could bump up to 30. I'll be honest with you. There, in worst case, we might wind up down at 10% per day, so more like 100 customers per day spread across 3 meals. So that's a little bit terrifying, but you just want to evaluate that. So from there, then what you would want to do is to basically go in and change the values for each of those. So we already have well, I didn't change it here, so I guess I need to go ahead and change that back. Percent of student customers per day. Did I? Sorry, mumbling to myself here. So let's make sure that so we did not, we need to make that 25, customer dollars per day, 10, number of student customers per day, Y2, or percent of student customers per day, make that 20. There we go. Okay, so having done all that, we're now back to our original 1.367, so that's just our regular scenario. We could also then run the best case, and so we would put in 20%. Well, let me track those scenario values first. So we'll put equity, NPV. So the equity is this amount. NPV is this amount. Oh, got to do paste value. Sorry about that. Okay. So format. Let's go ahead and clean that up. I am about cleaning up the formatting. All right, and then the best case, we would just go in and say, oh, put in 20%, 20%, $15, and 30%. Guess it would help. You can just go kind of highlight the ones that you're going to make the changes to, so it makes it easier to find them. Right, and grab your values. Again, we'll format those. And then you go in and you say, oh, 10%, what do we say, $8. Let's call it 30%, 30%, and you just grab your values again. Okay. Now, what I'm going to show you, and you don't have to use it, but Excel actually has a cool little scenario tool that could do all that for you. And before we do that, I'm just going to put my stuff back to my most likely case. 10. Oh, don't want to change that one. 25. And that what I did right there sort of highlights why it's nice to have this scenario tool. You don't want to accidentally change something you don't want to change. So scenario 2, go to Data, What If Analysis, Scenario Manager. And what it does, I'll make another one. We'll just call it XYZ. But basically, so we're going to add a scenario and we'll call it XYZ. All right. And you're going to go in and tell it what cells do you want to change. You see it says hold control click for non-adjacent cells. So we're going to say, oh, we want to change this cell, this cell, this cell, and this cell. All right. You say, okay. And it's going to say, what do you want to change them to? And, we're making this XYZ. So maybe we want to change the student customers today to 40% just to see what happens. So 0.4. We want to maybe mix things up and say, well, let's just do those. Let's just say that it really is like 15%. So it's not really best, worst, most likely. Let's say that the food cost is $12. Let's say that the amount that the customer spends is $12, and that we're able to hold food costs to 22%, but labor costs go up to 30%. So that would be an example of sort of a mixed scenario. All right, so we added that, and we'll go cancel. Now, I can simply go into this scenario manager where it's stored and basically say, show me this, okay? And so it's going to change the values, and you're going to be able to see what's up there. So that's kind of cool. And I like the fact that if you've already stored the most likely, like we did, you can say show again, and it resets the values back to where they were before. You can see they match. So I thought that's cool. I've already loaded the same things, and so it shows me the changes for the best case that I have, and you'll see that these values all match. It's already shown me the ones for the worst case that I have, so you'll see those all match. And you can put as many scenarios in there as you want, and so you can start to basically describe your scenarios. And since we have a small number of variables, but not just one, it's maybe easier to do that and keep track of what you want. The other thing that would allow you to do is basically, if you just wanted to run all your scenarios at once, you can hit this summary button, and it's going to ask you, to show the results, if you will, that point to what results you want to pay attention to. So again, you hold down the control button. We click equity and NPV, and we're going to do the scenario summary first, and I'll show you what that looks like. So you hit OK, and it pops up a new tab. Now you have to go back and figure out which cell is which. That's not the ideal thing, but it runs all of your scenarios out there for you, gives you your values, and you just got it. So I think that's kind of cool. We could also do the same thing, but let's do it with the pivot table, so we'll hit the summary. It saves your cells, so we're going to do a pivot table report. And so there you go. Best, likely, worst. I'm not quite sure what it's doing with XYZ there, to be honest with you. Anyway, so I don't know. I've never run this one. I don't find that particularly useful, so I probably like the other one better. I will show you this, that if you use the other one, that what you can do is basically go in, run the summary like you did before. Oh, hit the wrong thing again. Sorry. Just going to delete the page once again. All right, so we're going to run our what if analysis one more time. Summary report, the scenario summary. But you can just go in here, for example, and say, oh, that was food cost, and replace that. Now, you are going to have to do a little bit of reformatting, it looks like. So labor cost, I think we called that direct labor. Dollars per customer. What was that one? Percent of students. Okay, and then down here you have equity value. Oh, that went in the wrong place, didn't it? Percent of students. Gotta fix those. Equity value, NPV. And so basically you can go ahead and modify that. Now you have this nice table. It is just data. If you look in it, there's no formulas or anything. So you can either just use the table as it is. You can reference it for, set up different ways for charts, whatever you want to do. Anyway, just kind of wanted to show you guys that. I hope that's useful for you.